For more on this, we reach Christian Leuprecht. He's a professor at the Royal Military College of Canada and Queen's University's Centre for International and Defence Policy. We reached him in Kingston, Ontario. So, Christian, the debate on Canada's role in the fight against ISIS, it seems to be focused on airstrikes versus more training, or both. What do you think Canada needs to do to be an effective player in the military fight against ISIS?
Well, I don't think it's helpful to have these zero-sum debates and games here about whether planes or no planes and special operators, no special operators. We have a full spectrum military capability, and so any government with any deployment makes its decisions as to how it wants to optimize its particular contribution. What is the right number? 50 special operators, 100 special operators, 6 planes, 12 planes, 24 planes. Ultimately, this is a conversation with our allies with regards to the effects that we want to achieve. It's a political effort to demonstrate to our allies and to our coalition partners that we are all in this together and we understand that we are in this together. But it's also, I think, an effort to recognize that aside from a new government in power, also the stakes on the ground have shifted. We now have the Russians present, we have the Brits present with air capabilities, we have the French present with air capabilities, and we have the Americans flying offensive missions out of Incirlik, which they weren't able to do when Canada first showed up. And so you can argue that the conditions on the ground have changed, and so for that reason alone, it's perhaps prudent for the government to reassess what is the optimal contribution that it can make to achieve the collective effects that we're looking for.
And yet Canadian forces, they faced a firefight in northern Iraq this week, yet Canada remains firm in its stance to withdraw the CF-18s from the fight against ISIS. The fact that the Canadian fighter jets provided air cover, do you think that that's an important element that the Trudeau government should reconsider its position?
So, sure, jets are always in tight supply. And so it means that if we withdraw these 6 jets, it's not like there are 6 other jets that are just going to show up somewhere. And so it is going to mean that's a capability that will definitely be lacking. Moreover, the CF-18s can bring to bear the common targeting system. They are fairly seamlessly interoperable, for instance, with our American and our British partners. And so they're able to provide value added in a way that, for instance, French jets can't quite, because they're not integrated and interoperable in the same way that the Canadian jets are. But we also have to remember that in the fight that was talked about this week, it wasn't just Canadian air assets that provided close air support. We also had other allied air assets. And so this requires a close coordination with our coalition partners to ensure that if Canada opts to withdraw the jets, it does not leave either our special operators or our Kurdish security force partners needlessly exposed to ISIS attacks, and that air assets will remain in the area to be called in as need be.
Now, the government insists that Canada would be more effective in a training role. What do you think?
So, I mean, it depends what you understand by training. Is this training of troops out in the back of Erbil in some camp somewhere where we teach rank-and-file troops to march and to fire their weapons? Or is it a train, advise, and assist mission as we have now? In this particular case, we, for instance, know that Canadian special operators were as close as 6 kilometers from the front line, providing assistance and advice with regards to intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, logistics, operations, planning, and that's what ultimately allowed the Kurdish Peshmerga to repel this attack and to mount a counterattack. Remember, these are Kurdish forces that as little as 18 months ago were being hopelessly overrun by ISIS. And so it shows that it's not just the training component, it's the ability to be embedded with them fairly close to the front line to provide the advice that they need when they are under attack to be able to repel these. And so I think this is really what I think the conversation is about. What will this training mission look like? And apparently somehow a training mission is more humanitarian, but I'm not exactly sure how a training mission is any more humanitarian, because ultimately we're training soldiers, and we're training soldiers to kill the ISIS fighters that attack them.
Is it a communications problem that the government hasn't clearly? Rick Hillier was on the House earlier saying he just doesn't understand. They haven't articulated why they plan to bring home the CF-18s.
So, look, the deployment of Her Majesty's Armed Forces are a Crown prerogative. So the Crown does not need to explain why it deploys its armed forces, and it does not constitutionally need to explain why it withdraws its armed forces or makes changes to them. However, you can argue in a parliamentary system, the Crown has an obligation, the executive has an obligation to explain to taxpayers why and how it is spending taxpayer money and why it is putting Canadian lives ultimately at risk. But you would say that the converse does not necessarily apply when you withdraw from a mission, because in essence, withdrawing means that it will cost taxpayers less and there's less risk exposure for Canadian soldiers. So ultimately, it is more a matter of, I think, rationalizing however the government decides to reconfigure its contribution to the Allied and coalition effort, and being able to rationalize that to the Canadian electorate and taxpayer, and to rationalize that to our coalition and Allied partners, all of whom are, of course, exerting considerable pressure on Canada to stay the course.
Christian, thank you. That's Christian Leuprecht, a professor at the Royal Military College and Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario.